Hello, everyone. Just going to take a couple more seconds as people are filtering in before we get started. I hope everyone's having a wonderful start to their day, wherever you are joining us from. So I guess we'll get going. My name is Lena Aziz. I am the Lower Fraser campaigner at Watershed Watch Salmon Society. Um, you'll see a number of logos on this starting slide. And I just want to say, we'll get into it in a bit, but I want to say that Watershed Watch is a member of the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, as well as Resilient Waters, and Dan Stricker, who is our co-organizer for not only this webinar today, but for the entire series that we've been hosting over the last year and a bit, I would say. So at Watershed Watch, we work to restore and reconnect waterways in the Lower Fraser that are impacted by our aging and undersized flood infrastructure to improve them for fish passage and ensure our communities upstream remain safe. Also, we're working on aspects of integrated floodplain management with local governments and First Nation communities in the Lower Fraser region to support both those linear and lateral floodplain connectivities. Also on this slide, I wanted to share that our work is funded, primarily Dan's work through Resilient Waters is funded through the BC SRIF, the BC Salmon Restoration Innovation Fund, which is a joint federal provincial grant, as well as both Resilient Waters and Watershed Watch are very lucky to have the support of the Real Estate Foundation of BC. As I've already mentioned, Dan already, there are a number of people who do help to put these webinars together, but Dan Straker from Resilient Waters is really key to all of that. If you're new to seeing my face, it's because Dan usually hosts these webinars and I'm usually in the background letting people in, but we've switched it up for today. So I will do my best to move us through in a timely way. So yes, a big thank you to everyone who helps put these webinars together. And this series, if you're interested, is called Designing for Flood Resilience. And today we're focusing on flood resilience and farming practices. Before we move further, I would like to hand it over to Kelly. Excuse me. Kelly Yates is a member of the Kwantlen Nation. He's one of our presenters today, but before we jump into all of that, I would like to hand it over to him to provide us with a bit of a welcome before we get started. So Kelly, over to you.
Okay, thank you. As mentioned, my name is Kelly Yates. I'm a member of the Kwantlen First Nation. I born and raised in Fort Langley, started fishing in when I was 7 or 8 years old with my grandfather, who is his name is Ernie Brown, and his name was Billy Brown. I don't know if any of you've been to Fort Langley and noticed the street called Billy Brown Road. That was my great grandfather. I apologize for the noise. I'm in the middle of a racetrack in Dallas, just south of Dallas, and there's cars firing up and shutting off and so on and so forth. I've done the best I could to mitigate the noise. So yeah, like I said, I started fishing when I was 8 or 9 years old with my grandpa, and I'm still fishing today. One of the things I remember about fishing when I first started was, catching a 52-pound spring salmon or Chinook or king salmon, whatever people know it by. And I'm still fishing today. My family depends on me fishing. Every one of our family members, I smoke the salmon, I can it. My sisters can it. They, chop it up to meal portions and vacuum seal it, freeze it. We eat it smoked, we eat it fresh, we eat it canned, we eat it like however, and it's probably one meal a week, maybe two sometimes. So my family and friends depend on fishing. which is, all part and parcel of, mitigating the floods and what happens in case, the atmospheric river. I don't know if any of you saw any of the, like, the damage or the at that atmospheric river. I think it was, what was that, 2021? Anyways, it was unbelievable. Um, so I just want to thank you for inviting me on to join this meeting, and thanks to the Rivershed. I appreciate it, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kelly. You've already touched on a number of different things when it comes to this session in particular. You've already mentioned food security through salmon and being able to have access to that. And that's really important in a conversation about farming and flood resilience. Thank you. Personally, I am sitting on unceded Coquitlam territory. My home waters is the Coquitlam River, but our work spans the whole Lower Mainland and supports the Stolo nations in the Fraser Valley, out to the Salish Sea and the lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish as well. So please feel free to take this time to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like, and share the name of the nation's territories on which you are calling from today, if you feel so able to do so. I also want to take a moment to reflect on flooding and First Nations from a settler perspective. The systems and the mentality that have been designed to control water and flooding are not unlike those that have worked to control Indigenous people over the past 150 plus years. Many First Nations were forcefully displaced and restricted to reserves, often in harm's way, in the floodplains, which are seen on this image. You can see the reserves kind of overlaid with the floodplain. And a study a couple of years ago found that more than 90% of reserves across Canada are located in flood-prone areas. This is certainly the case in the Lower Fraser watershed. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is part of the settlers' history, as we have to live with it and actively take steps to repair this broken system. So with all of that in mind, we'll move into the agenda for today. So we're going to have a series of presentations, which I hope are really engaging and enlightening and get us thinking a bit more about the role of farms or agricultural land when it comes to flood resilience. We have a great presentation by Dave Zehnder from Farmland Advantage. Dave Zehnder is also an advisor to our Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition. Then Dave will be engaging Tom Hoogendoorn and Holger Schwichtenberg in conversation. They're both farmers from the Agassiz area. And then Lara Volgyesi from Rivershed Society BC and Kelly Yates will be back again to talk about some of the awesome work in the Glen Valley area. And then we'll move into some Q&A. If we have time, we'll jump into breakout sessions. But we really do want to hear your thoughts and questions. And like, if you're looking for clarity on how you could be working with the agriculture sector more in your community, we want to hear that as well. So please do share your thoughts as we move through this morning. Then we have some brief next steps and we'll be closing out. As always, please remember to rename yourself in Zoom with your name and your organization. We are recording this for those of you who are just joining. And also please use the chat box to ask any questions. So I've kind of mentioned this briefly, but why this webinar? Like we've already said it, like farmland, we saw the map earlier. Not only are reserves in the floodplain, 90% of them across Canada, but obviously much of Canada's farmland is in floodplains as well. And so farmland is a crucial part of the flood mitigation solution, which is what we'll be trying to address today. And in order to do that, we are going to be showcasing some proven tools, some old, some new, and some practices that can be adopted in your communities and trying to engage with local farmers. So before we get started, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So Dan is going to be running a poll on a couple of questions. Yeah, just to get to know who's in the room and your knowledge on this topic. So Dan, go ahead. All right, we've got 72% of people participating, 74, almost everyone. Okay, well, Dan, do you want to share the results?
Yeah, I think people should be able to see the results now. Yeah, so you're seeing us the mix of folks that are here today, lots from local and uh, basically settler governments, and a smattering of the rest of you. And then on the other side, the familiarity with farming as it relates to flood resilience, I kind of a mix of all across the map.
Thank you. Excuse me. Great. So let's see, I'm just going to close that poll and move on here. So before we get into the presentations from Dave and everyone else, I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, because this webinar is being hosted as one of the things that we're doing as this coalition. So we are a multidisciplinary group of organizations. Oh, sorry, I'm realizing the logo is a little fuzzy. We are a multidisciplinary group of organizations and experts working towards reducing systemic challenges and developing more integrated and resilient flood planning for the lower mainland. So that's who we are. Oh dear. There we are. Sorry about that. So our work really kind of breaks down into these larger circles. Our goal really is a flood resilient communities in the Lower Fraser that are vibrant, that has a healthy ecosystem, and everyone's able to live in safety. But how we get there is, of course, going to take a little while. This webinar in particular comes under one of our three buckets of work. It comes under our convene bucket. So we're looking to not only share information out, but we also want to hear from others, build relationships, and essentially create shared values across sectors. In order to do that, we have been meeting a lot, and we came together shortly before the November 2021 atmospheric river and floods, but our work became like but after the floods, of course, it showed us how incredibly important and integral it was to ensure that our region was kind of moving in the same direction. And we knew what it meant when we said, oh, we want to build back better. Everyone should have a good understanding of what that is. And that starts with meeting on the ground, finding common ground, finding those shared values. And so we've been, so our work includes engaging the province of BC on the benefits of supporting multi-beneficial flood management that will protect communities and critical infrastructure, advance reconciliation, and ensure long-term resilience in a changing climate. So this work is done in collaboration with local governments, First Nations, farmers, and environmental organizations. And how do we do this? Sometimes something that's become clear in the region is that the way we work is as important as the work itself. So we have to work together. So we at the LFFC are bringing people together, leaders from First Nations and local governments. So we share information, we get to know each other, we understand each other's challenges. And we have been hosting events and planning for the Lower Mainland around a set of principled and collaborative approaches to flood resilience for the region. So we have hosted forums and gatherings. We're aligning with the BC flood strategy to do regional work in the Lower Mainland. And yeah, so this web series kind of is part of all of that work. If anyone's interested in any of these reports that have come out of our meetings, we'll be able to share a link out probably in the chat to our reports page, but also that'll be shared out in a follow-up email afterwards as well. All of this work is really based on a set of 5 principles that came together that were created or like established at our very first gathering in July 2022. And some of you might have heard this before, but our 5 principles that we want to see overlaid on in much of our conversations is reducing risk and adapting to climate change, advancing reconciliation, ensuring that salmon are thriving, And when we say salmon, we really mean ecosystems like the biodiversity, supporting sustainable economies and resilient communities, and making sure that everyone is part of that solution. And what we heard at our second forum in June 2023 is that the farmers wanted to see themselves represented in this, the agricultural sector. So hence, we started to have more conversations and more engagement with the farming community. Before I move on, we are, of course, in the middle of an election cycle. People are trying to become leaders of the province. And we at the LFFC also have our asks to the provincial government, which we have been putting out publicly, sharing with those who are running as candidates. And I just want to share these with everyone in this room as well, so you understand some of the advocacy work we are also doing. Our two key asks are this. We want a commitment to protect floodplain communities and farmland by funding and implementing the BC flood strategy by 2025 in partnership with First Nations and local governments. And we also want to see like a fund and endorsement of the regional floodplain collaborations, exactly like what we're doing. We're moving this work forward in the Lower Mainland, and we would like to see funding and endorsement of this work moving forward.
Video?
So moving into our work here with the farmer and First Nation conversations, again, the work we're doing is really built off of all of our gatherings and what people want to see in their regions and in their communities. So I have here a brief timeline of all the work we've been doing since 2021, including our Farmer First Nation work, which started in February 2023 with our first gathering, which is quite, if you ask Dave, he'd be like, this is quite historic because all coming together in this way, and it was great. We followed that up with a place names tour, where some farmers and First Nations joined us on a day-long tour to learn all about the history of the land. And then in May of 24, we did a Fraser Valley flood resilience tour. So we went to look at farms, those that were impacted by the atmospheric river, and those that have been working now diligently over many years to build resilience on their farms. And we'll hear from a couple of farmers today about that. So just wanted to share that. And now, gosh, I have a lot to say. I'm very sorry about this. Our presenters today are, so Dave Zehnder I already mentioned. So Dave owns a cattle ranch in Vermeer, but he is super passionate about agriculture and ecology. He's been an amazing mentor and has been working across the region, and especially here in the Lower Mainland, to advise us and provide support on how we can best engage with farmers in our region. So I'll leave it at that for now, but you'll have access to these slides later. Following Dave's presentation, he'll be inviting Tom Hoogendoorn and Holger to have a conversation about what that means. So I'm just going to stop sharing my slides, and invite Dave to turn his camera on and share his deck. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. I'm just going to pull this up. Can you hear me now, Lena?
Yes, I can hear you. And you can move into presentation mode.
I'm trying to do that, and the banner at the bottom is blocking that. Does anyone have any tips on how to access your screen behind quickly? Sorry.
Dave, you can, at the top of your Windows, it says slideshow. You can click on slideshow. Yeah.
Try that. Okay. All right. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you, and hello to everyone. I am talking to you from the East Kootenays, in the other corner of the province, but I do work provincially. We have worked on the Farmland Advantage program development, and now for about 18 years, and including things like being the vice chair of the Agricultural Land Commission. So we have that provincial focus. So I just want to start today by setting the context of farmland and its importance to flood resilience. So first showing the extent of farmland, and in this case we're going to focus on the lower mainland. And this is a map showing the extent of the agricultural land reserve. So you can see it's covers pretty much all of the area, or a significant portion of the lower mainland. It is a serious part of the land distribution. And if we zoom in to the Chilliwack area specifically, for example, just zooming into one area, and this map shows the land use across that landscape. And you can see again that agriculture in tan color is vastly overrepresented on that landscape. And if we look at it in relation to flood risk, this analysis indicated that it's got the highest level of flood risk. So it is very widely distributed, and it is very important in terms of flood and flood potential mitigation. I'm not sure how much of a lag there is, so I apologize if there is one. Lena, is there?
It's going well. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. All right. Okay. So when we think about agriculture in the flood context, and we think back to the flooding of 2021, it was a major disaster. In fact, it was the largest agricultural disaster in BC's history. And we often think about farmland and farmers as victims of flood, and as these statistics bear that out, they certainly are that. And I should say too that a lot of things we're going to be talking about are practices that we propose that could be happening on farmland, and we acknowledge that we're going to, there's work to be done to get that approval, and we're not necessarily saying this is automatically happening, and especially there's still people maybe who have sensitivities after that flood event. So. But in general, the types of practices that we're talking about today fall into these broad categories, the types of tools that we can use for flood mitigation that will benefit the community at large. Now, this is thinking about farmland not as and farmers as victims, but actually as farmers and farmland as part of the solution. So that's a juxtaposition to that previous perspective. And so if we look at things like flood buffers, where, for example, setting back a dike on a farmland, that can have a big impact on flood mitigation, as well as riparian buffers. We're going to talk a lot about them. There's possibilities around on-farm flood storage in ponds and lakes and the like. There's opportunities in modified cropping, like switching from perennial to annual cropping. And improve drainage, getting the water off the farm quickly after a flood happens and during the flood. And a category that I call land sculpting, which could involve things like terracing, swales, and berms. And we think about that flood event, and here's a photograph taken from space showing some of those impacts, and some of the soil that's flushed out to the ocean during that flood event specifically came from that farmland upstream. And so that impact is felt right on those farms. And when we talk about erosion and some of those practices that could help to mitigate erosion, roots are a big issue. So in this slide, we can see that a farmer deciding to, on the left-hand side of the screen, deciding to plant a perennial crop with very deep roots, that can have a dramatic effect in resistance to erosion as compared to the right side of the screen with an annual crop, which looks like wheat or maybe barley. And those blue lines showing the extent of their typical root system. So there's a really wide variation when farmers go to make a choice in their cropping. And of course, along those same lines, a healthy riparian buffer is also critical, as many of you know, and that those roots of all that vegetation, and especially those deep binding roots from the trees and those larger shrubs, are really, really important. They're like the rebar holding together the banks along the part those banks and causing huge problems downstream. Okay, so to further that, we can look at these riparian buffers as one example of one of these tools. And the vegetation on the left part of the screen is showing how it's holding the bank structure very well. It would be very resistant to flooding. If the flood overflowed its bank, it could pass through that area. It would slow the water flow. I've seen statistics that show if you double the speed of water, it can move objects 64 times the size. So the speed, it's not just the flood effect, the water inundation, it's the speed that water flows over the surface that is important as well. And riparian buffers play an important role in that. And they also have a lot of co-benefits in terms of biodiversity and fish. And we heard some of that and going to hear some more about that later. So we often hear about discussions around gray versus green infrastructure and doing some comparisons of that. And we know that when we invest in gray infrastructure, it has large carbon footprints, and it can have long-term energy use needs, and it's a depreciating asset. When you build a structure to try and resist floods, human man-made non-green infrastructure, it immediately starts to depreciate. And if you compare that to a tree, for example, that gets planted along stream bank, the opposite is true. It's appreciating in value and its potential to be a mitigating force. So that's an exciting way to look at it. And of course, there's all these secondary benefits: carbon sequestration, potentially, fish habitat, recreational opportunities, and even public health benefits that come with green infrastructure. So a lot of the work that we focus on really does look at that. And in this example, we see a lot of these concepts, using green infrastructure, but in the urban environment. And there are huge initiatives underway across the world, including in China. They've done this in many cities where they've taken this intervention, putting in these flood mitigative practices. And also in Copenhagen, they've done the same thing. And what they find is the more green infrastructure they put in place, the less gray they need, which can save them money and be more effective. But if you think about that, it is extremely expensive still to take put these practices into place within the footprint of the city. And I'm not saying not to do it there, but if you think about that in relation to the opportunities that might present themselves on farmland, then we can start to see the benefit of that. So what I'd like to do now is just highlight a few great examples to show that these kinds of methods can be done at scale in international examples. So one of our partners within the Lower Fraser floodplains group is associated with the Floodplains by Design program. And just to look at that ribbon at the bottom, I mean, they have done hundreds of miles of stream restoration, tens of thousands of acres of improved lands. And by the way, they've also generated many thousands of jobs in doing so. So they do a lot of work with implementing a lot of the tools we talked about on that at scale. And so I'm just trying to show that there are potentially, we don't have a lot of time in today's presentation, and we're already running a little late, so apologize for that. But these things are happening in other jurisdictions. We're a little late to the game, but we're trying to catch up quickly. Another great example that's often cited is Room for the River program, or that Dutch pronunciation that maybe some of our Dutch participants could help us with. And you're getting the benefit of learning a little Dutch today, I guess, because I don't know how you pronounce that, but that looks like how you say river there in Dutch. But so some of the things that they do, they take multiple different approaches to trying to reduce the risk of flooding, especially looking at, bringing back the historic floodplains. And I know we have like a wide variety of perspectives on today's call and levels of knowledge. But this idea of eliminating dikes close to the river, for example, is something that I think is really relevant, and that's on the left side. So they're removing a lot of those impediments, which, in the case of the Lower Fraser, there's a lot of diking, and a lot of the analysis shows that over time, that diking is not going to be able, the current diking is not going to be able to hold back the kinds of floods that are anticipated in the future. And so, and so by giving the river more room, it has this chance to slow the river down, as we talked about with that the physics of force at play when water moves quickly over there, but it also allows it to spread out further. And in particular, what we're interested in is the potential for farmers in this, and the potential to farm that land between the water's edge and the dike that's set back a long ways from the water's edge. There's the potential for modified farming practices. Again, very important to work with the farmers to make sure that's going to work for them. But that's a great example, and again, one that has involved billions and billions of dollars, done at a massive scale. Certainly at the kind of scale we're thinking about for the Lower Mainland. Another great example is the Nagiri project, and Pacific Salmon Foundation is starting an initiative looking at this for the Lower Mainland, and it works with the landscape. They're down in that Central Valley in the Sacramento area in California, where a lot of our food comes from, and there's big rice growing areas, and they found that growing rice in those areas and incorporating fish and allowing wild fish to enter into those flooded areas, that and modifying some of their practices, that the co-benefit is that these areas are fantastic rearing areas for especially the small fry that flourish in the zooplankton that's present in those areas. So it's not a matter of farming or fish. Sometimes it can be farming and fish, and farming and these other solutions, and so that's a really exciting example, again done at a massive scale, involving a lot of money. And finally, just one really interesting and ancient example from Mexico City. Maybe a lot of you know about this, but the Chinampas in Mexico City are this amazing example. What we see in this picture is farms. So this land, this is not in fact land, even though there's trees growing here. These are actually rafts of vegetation growing on the surface of the water. And I'm not necessarily saying this is a great option for the Lower Mainland, but it's just an interesting example of a historic use. And ironically, they have drained a lot of that to create one of the large, and I don't know what it is about us humans and floodplains, but they have drained a lot of Mexico City, that basin, to develop one of the largest cities on earth. But there is this remnant area there. It's a fascinating area if you ever get a chance to visit. So, and I'd be remiss, I guess, if I didn't talk about Farmland Advantage. It's something that I've been working
Dave,
at for
just
the
to
last
say,
18 years.
Sorry, Dave, just a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm wrapping it up. It's a program that works with farmers. It's looking at making this a good business decision for farmers. So we're not depending on farmers doing this in a voluntary capacity. We are establishing paid contracts with farmers to take on some of these practices, especially where it has an extraordinary impact on their financial bottom line. So if we're asking a farmer to set back a dike, we need to make sure that works for them financially. And so we have developed this mechanism to do that, and all the tools and the monitoring that goes with that. And we don't have time to talk about that, sadly. But it's an exciting new approach, and it's also one of the few approaches that can do that effectively within the ALR and still be compliant with the ALR. So we can talk about that. And the Foodlands program is another great example. We're going to hear from them or later, those folks a little bit later on in the presentation. So this is just an example. We're taking some of these areas that are degraded, where farming has happened to the edge, and replanting and restoring some of these areas to bring back some of that healthy riparian, just as an example of one of these mitigations. So finally, I'm going to play a video. I'll go back to it though from the Emergency Planning Secretariat, and we're going to hear from Tyrone, and he's a Stalo tribal chief. He's one of our coalition members. They and their organization are, and we're gonna play a recording of some of his thoughts around farming, because of course the First Nations are fundamental to this, and as we heard, they are very important to the solution. So let's listen to Tyrone, and then I guess Dan, we're going to pop back. I just wanted to finish my slide. Then once you finish with that video, please. So Dan's going to play the video now, or not.
And that we had for you. All right, so the first question that we had for you today was just based on today's webinar and the fact that we are talking about flood risk reduction options on agricultural land. We would love to just hear your perspective on these flood solutions.
Well, given within our traditional territory, the entire ag sector has a huge footprint right across the territory, particularly in the lower mainland Fraser Valley. My real main concern with respect to risk is the inability to get water off the farmers' fields in a timely fashion, particularly during a pluvial event. We know there's 1,700 kilometers of historic fish-bearing streams trapped from the Fraser by dikes, railways, and roads. What happens if we get 6 or 8 inches or 10 inches of rain on the south-facing mountains of the north side of the Fraser Valley? It's going to sit on farmers' fields for weeks before it drains. So we have to open up those waterways to release that water into the Fraser. So it is about recognizing that the farmers' fields are going to get wet, but what can we do more proactively to ensure that when the rain comes, it is shed from the fields as quickly as possible?
And to be able to do that and to have those types of solutions, we really know that there's the importance of farmers and First Nations working together. And this is especially important because in this kind of environment, we've seen that often it's perceived that they don't see eye to eye. And so did you have any comments on ways that we can build tangible relationships between these two groups? And then bringing into that, if there are any Stolo values that you think could be incorporated into this work towards building flood-friendly farming practices.
Firstly, I see 2 types of farmers out there. One is the multi-generational farmer. They've been here for 5, 6, 7 generations on the same land, doing largely the same thing, or maybe changing ag practices, but they're on the land, right? And then there's the newbies that are coming in that bought a farm, and whether they knew how to farm before or not, they're new to the area, so they don't know us. They don't know the land as intimately as those multi-generational farmers do, and certainly not as intimately as we do. So I think there's an educational aspect on what the environment's been historically for the ag sector here in the Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, and trying to predict where it's going to be going in the next 20, 50, 100 years, and just educating farmers on that right across all sectors, and then also educating them on who we are as Stalo people. It's important that anybody living within Stalo territory, Stalo title lands should be aware of us. So there's an opportunity to build relations through education, coming up with particularly the common values of the multi-generational farmer. They care about the land. They've got an interest in the land itself. The land isn't a piece of real estate for them. It's not a commodity. It's something that, they generate funds from, absolutely, but they do it in such a way that they want their children and their grandchildren to be doing similar practices. So there's a lot of alignment there in terms of our values around longevity, learning from the past and making sure we do better going into the future. So there's an alignment of values. Maybe a piece of that education is identifying some common values between farmers and Stalo, and just sharing those to start building relationships. I do know that a lot of the local farmers do have long-standing relations with some Stalo here in our territory, but we need more farmers aware of us, and ideally taking the whole regional approach, the entire Fraser Valley, Lower Mainland, coming up with a flood resilience strategy that we're leading on, that in the end farmers endorse, because it's really important to us that food be produced in a timely way, that food makes its way to market, and that we have access to market. So we have a vested interest between our Stalo people, Stalo values, and farmers' values, particularly around food productivity.
All
Did
right.
that
Well,
cover?
yeah, I think so. So thank you for answering those questions, and we will pass it back to Dave.
Hmm?
Okay, Dan, Lena, can you hear me? Nod your head if you can hear me. Okay. And I just, no, my slide's not advancing. Great. I'm not sure why, but my slide's not advancing. But I just wanted to say, just to wrap up my part of the presentation before we talk to Tom and Holger, that I think we heard from everyone so far that there's a strong need for better planning and better mapping. We talked a bit about some of the tools with the brief time that we've had here, and their possible applications. And but what we need right now is a little bit better planning in some areas, some better mapping and modeling, so that we can really target the right tool for the right location at the right scale. And so that's, rather than do kind of a shotgun approach, I think we need to be very targeted with this. And so I wanted to make that final point, that we're talking a lot about these tools. We don't have a lot of time to go into the details on them, but that's critical to remember. And so hopefully that is something that's come out of our farmers and First Nations gathering, that this has been flagged as an important piece. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can hear from a couple of our folks on the ground, real serious farmers in the Lower Mainland. We have Tom and Holger with us today. And Holger and his family these are both dairy farmers. And the reason that we have dairy farmers is not because that's the only form of agriculture, but they are the largest form of agriculture in terms of the land that they occupy in the Lower Mainland, and in agricultural, from an agricultural perspective. And so we're lucky to have these two guys with us today. And maybe Tom and Holger can just. So Tom is a massive farmer, I would say, in the Lower Mainland scale, in the Agassiz area, and his family has farmed there for a long time. And he's also a member of the Milk Marketing Board, which is a big deal. And then also we have with us Holger, who is the former chair of the BC Dairy Association. So can you guys both hear me? If you can unmute yourselves. Okay, you're both unmuted. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Good. So I just wanted to start out with a kind of broad question. What do you see as the benefits of the tools we discussed on the presentation and that you've been incorporating into your farm and your farming practice?
Well,
maybe we could start with Holger and then we can go to Tom, or the other way around. Doesn't matter.
we'll go the other way around. Age before beauty. Wrong.
These guys are friends too, by the way.
Wrong on both counts, Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here to talk with everyone here and seeing the interest in how we can all work together as First Nations and farmers, and to deal with this flood issue. And yeah, we've been farming in Agassiz for 63 years, and been doing. There's not a day that goes by when I'm not at the river at least once, unless it's really rainy or really stormy. I just love sitting. Our farmer's right on the riverbank. It's got about 2 kilometers of river frontage. Just enjoy being there, talking to people that are there. So over the years, we've come to know the river and rely on the river Respect the river. That's a big thing. People have to respect that river. And it's the Fraser River, by the way. Sorry, I didn't say that. But, you know, over the years, we've learned how to farm with the freshets a little bit. What to plant, when to plant it, where to plant it. We have a lot of sloughs running through our properties and so on, and we've really concentrated on having native vegetation on the slough banks, having grasses close by, not bothering the integrity of the banks, because we understand that soil erosion is not good for anybody. And with soil erosion, that means I'm losing my valuable resource down the river, like you seen on that one slide of the satellite picture Dave showed earlier. So no, we're doing lots of things to mitigate on our farm. Now that's different from, of course, stopping a massive freshet coming down the river. But
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Yeah. And so, yeah, Holger here. Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone, for being here. So we've also been farming about 5 miles down the road from Tom for 64 years as a family. We are on the other side of the dike, as we like to call it around here. So I would say that on our farm, maybe not so much the flood mitigation practices, but I think the mere thought of talking about what can be done, what has been done, what needs to be done, and making the agricultural sector aware of some of the steps that can be taken in Agassiz, in the Vetter area, in the Sumas area, of how we can deal with these increasing amounts of water that are coming our way. I think it's just engaging dairy farmers and other farmers in the conversations together with First Nations. What can we do? Because building higher dikes and bigger pumps, I don't think is the long-term solution for what we're attempting to do here, and recognizing that somehow trying to deal with a Fraser River flood is a large undertaking. And I believe some of the first steps is just to get the agricultural sector, First Nation sector, and government, different levels of government talking what can be done and what needs to be done so that we're ready.
Okay, great. Those are great answers. Thank you. So a lot of these solutions that we talked about do involve farmland. You guys have already voluntarily done a lot of this work on your land, and by doing such, you actually are giving up growing area often to plant trees, and so that with north of $100,000 an acre, I think, is that an exaggeration for some good farmland? And so that's a lot of money for a piece of land, and to incorporate some of these solutions means giving some of that up to accommodate this. But some of the solutions we talked about and some of the interventions may be really a large scale and may have more dramatic impacts on a farm, where it's something like you might not be able to bear that brunt as a cost for a farmer. So my question is, if society could make this a good business decision for producers, in that there's an equitable amount of money or some offset offered to the farmer to compensate those impacts, to accommodate, say if we're setting back a dike in an area to give more room for the river, or if Tom can continue to farm outside the dike and not have the dike moved closer to the river, for example, and he's somehow enabled to do that. What do you think in general the uptake would be in your industry and in farming in the area as a whole, if we can make this a good business decision? Like this is not just you being a good citizen and trying, you can go so far with your own goodwill, but at some point it hits the reality of your finances. So my question again, if this was a good business decision, what do you think the uptake would be?
I guess it depends on what the business decision is going to be. I mean, if for me the dike is set quite a ways back from the river where I live, so we have there's probably 700 acres between the river and the dike where I am. And but if they're going to do a lot, the economic thing becomes, can we continue to farm prosperously with what is coming down the pipe? If they want to put keep farming away from the river for 100 meters, it's not going to be sustainable for us. Then they might as well give us a chunk of cash and we'll go farm somewhere else. No, if they want to sort of say, hey, look, we're gonna do a little bit of this, like strengthen the dikes to where we are, and do some work along the riverbank to stop the erosion, I'm all for that. Because I think, if like you said in your presentation, lots of grass, sloping banks, some for us where we are, we're protected by riprap, and that stood the test of time since 1972 when they strengthened that up. So it's there's a various different ways of doing it, but if we're going to be saying, hey, you're going to lose 30% of your acreage to sort of flood mitigation areas for a massive flood, then we'll probably move along, right? So,
Right.
I think, Dave.
What if just go ahead.
No, I was just going to chime in here. I think that no matter how it's structured, what kind of a deal that you have with local government or let's say provincial, federal government, that the money also for compensation arrives in a timely fashion. Yeah. That if you have a setback dike or they've moved the dikes further back, and that let's say 10 or 12 years, heaven forbid, you do get flooded, that the money doesn't arrive 2 years hence, that it is something that is done. You've suffered the losses that year, and you're willing to do that with this agreement that you had. But I think that has to be ironed out to make sure that it's done in a timely fashion. And I think if farmers have belief in that, there will be more uptake.
So, Dave, if you look at the picture behind me, I'm only 250 meters, 300 meters away from the Fraser River. It's directly behind me. We've kept that riparian zone. You see a few cattle pasturing there. We've kept it in pasture. We've kept the trees along the riverbank. We haven't leveled it out and made cornland or grassland out of it. We just let it become pasture. And we've done that along the whole stretch of the river where we live. And so that's us wanting to mitigate our risk on our own dime, so to speak, right? So that sort of thing can be done. But if it's mandated, it costs us money because that land is not being used for high value stuff. But that's the sort of thing we have to talk about. Where are we going to be compensated and how this is going to go?
I just want to hop in and say we have about a minute, Dave.
Ooh. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just finish with this. I think some of the things we're talking about is proactive, right? We're not necessarily reacting after the flood, after the event, paying farmers for damage, but actually making it so that economically they can farm it in an effective way that accommodates these things. And we need you to hold on to that broader floodplain that you already have there, and not put more impediments to flood than you already have there. So keeping the good stuff in place and maybe widening in other areas is part of the solution. But just going back to the response from the flood of 2021, just last one, do you think that farms are better off now than before the floods, or where do you think we're at? What did we learn from that, and what's been done? Just quickly.
I'll chime in first here, Tom. I think we've learned a lot, and there was an incredible community spirit when that event took place. But honestly, not a whole lot has happened since then.
I'm going to, the way the farmers and generally the neighbors came together, us neighbors, was amazing. But a lot of empty promises from all levels of government. And I'm sure everyone's aware of what that feels like, right? And it's just talk. That's all it is, right? And until the next emergency happens, there'll be more talk. So,
right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but I guess it was just a bit of a glimpse into sort of the real life and on the ground perspective. So thanks again for that. Dan, you have self-control, and I'll hand it over to Lena, I believe.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom and Holger, and thank you, Dave, for moving us through that conversation. Yes, so I am now going to invite Lara and Kelly to share about their work on the Foodlands project. So Lara is a landscape architect and Foodlands restoration consultant. She's been working at the Rivershed Society now for 5 years, with 5 more years towards making this awesome vision for the Foodlands Corridor Restoration Program come to fruition. So she'll tell us all about that. And we've already heard briefly from Kelly. He's a member of Kwantlen Nation. He's a fisherman, and apparently he's also on a road trip in Texas. Kelly has been involved with the Foodlands program since its inception. So they'll be sharing about that. Thank you.
All right. Everybody can hear me? Kelly, you're muted. There we go. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting us to share some of the learnings over the past 4 or 5 years with the Foodlands program at Rivershed. I am grateful to reside as an uninvited guest here on the ancestral unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I recognize that this is their inherent jurisdiction. Joining me today is friend and colleague Kelly Yates, as you know, from Kwantlen First Nation. And so, Kelly, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up the screen and then you're going to go and introduce yourself. So I have ability to share here. Hang on a second. Let's go. Can someone confirm that my screen's being shared here?
Not
It
yet.
is not. No.
It's not. Okay, good. Good to know. Hang on a minute. There we go.
While Lara's doing that, I'll just mention, since we are running, this webinar is set from 10 to 11:30, so we do have half an hour left in the webinar. We typically do a breakout group towards the end, but seeing that there's like so much to share, I think we might be omitting our breakout groups and instead going to answer some of the questions in the Q&A after Lara and Kelly's presentation. You're always free to hang out. Oh, where did she go? There she is. After our session's over, to have more informal conversations with us, we'll keep this room open till around 11:40. But Lara, we're still not seeing your screen. There we are. Things are happening.
Okay, can you hear me too?
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's a win. Okay. All right, Kelly, pardon me. Joining me is Kelly Yates. Take it away from here, Kelly.
Take it away. I thought I took it away at the beginning. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Kelly, we can see and hear you.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure, Lara, what you wanted me to say.
Oh, okay. So Kelly, you just tell me to, if you want to, you did tell us a little bit about the importance of the Fraser to you and your community. If there's anything else you wanted to share here. But, also as I'm going, because I'm controlling the slides, just say, Lara, go to the next slide if you want me to do that. Happy to do that. We'll work together.
Okay, well, you can just do the thing, I don't know if it was Dave or Tom or Holger mentioned the word respect. That's one thing I didn't say at the beginning is, my grandmother told me to respect the river. So you don't litter in it, you don't spit in it, you don't pee in it, you don't do anything. If you respect it, it will respect you back. So I liked when I heard that word, respect. Anyways, carry on, Laura. Another.
Can you see this slide?
Yeah, I can see it.
Tell us. Should I move to the next one?
Yes.
feel like I'm having issues.
Hi, Lara. We can see your slides. I don't
Okay.
think Kelly is aware that you're asking him to present on these slides.
Okay. Kelly, do you want to tell us, these are your photos. This is your bounty. Do you want to talk to us about the species here and the dependence of these species on the health of the Fraser and the Salmon River and other tributaries for food security and exercising your right to fish and those kinds of things?
You know, as I mentioned later, it's just a different way. You know, in the top left is chum salmon that I smoke in the smokehouse. And top right is canned sockeye, and the bottom two are hooligans before and after smoking. All, you know, they're all different types and species of fish that we consume and we depend on. So the river is very important, you know, to us. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll take over here. I'd like to begin with some context that underpins the philosophy behind the Foodlands Corridor Restoration Program. One that ecological and cultural connections are intertwined. One's sense of place is founded on one's relationships to all things that lie within it, including stories and the sustenance that they bring. Foodlands restoration work weaves. What's going on here? Something just jumped in there. Can people still hear me okay and see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's glitchy. My Wi-Fi can be a bit glitchy here. Sorry about that. So yeah, as I said, one sense of place is founded on the relationship to that place, and everybody has a different relationship to that. And so Foodlands restoration work weaves kind of ecological and cultural relationships together that strives for whole systems and holistic approach to restore all the components that constitute a healthy watershed. As Lena mentioned, it's earlier at the beginning of this webinar, it's important to acknowledge that many of the threats to the Fraser River and the Fraser watershed have roots going back over 150 years. The forced exclusion and displacement of Indigenous peoples from their territories has limited their rights to access their lands for hunting, fishing, and harvesting, as well as access for management and long-term stewardship. I think many of us use territorial acknowledgements because we recognize and respect that First Nations have lived on and stewarded these lands since time immemorial. That means we acknowledge that people have been a part of the landscape for as long as the landscape itself has existed. Foodlands starts from a place of acknowledging this historical connection between ecology and culture and aims to keep that front of mind in everything that we do. This ultimately means that as much of the Foodlands work that we're doing is spent building and holding relationships as it is designing and implementing restoration prescriptions. I'm sure everybody is familiar with this quote. We use the term foodlands because it aims to acknowledge a diversity of food harvesting systems, both from a Western farming perspective, as well as a traditional hunting and gathering perspective. And a key part of honoring the connection between ecology and culture is recognizing that to have healthy landscapes, we need to have healthy people and vice versa. We can't have one without the other. To that end, Foodland strives to increase the availability of culturally important food and medicinal plants for fish, wildlife, avian and insect populations, as well as for humans. When it comes to agricultural land, this is often a dramatic shift for farm holders towards rethinking what constitutes a productive landscape. In order to carry out this work, we've had to find ways to bring people together who wouldn't ordinarily be in the same room. The Foodlands program is a container to hold respectful and meaningful conversation, to facilitate and uncover value alignment and shared objectives, And from there, that this allows us to co-create an action plan to achieve common goals. This process ensures that we're able to understand the complexity of issues affecting everyone and everything, and to find solutions that are innovative, long-lasting, and impactful. Kelly, do you want to talk about the Schwichtenberg, the Salmon River corridor a little bit?
No,
The work.
you just do it. I know time is of the essence and we're running short of it.
Okay.
So
Okay. The Stashwayam Salmon River is the Hunkaminam name for Salmon River, is located in Langley in the shared territories of the Kwantlen, KC, Semiahmoo, and Matsqui nations. Back in kind of 2021, late 2020, we had some initial conversations with members at the Kwantlen First Nation and Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance to understand what the community kind of areas of priority were. The Stashwayam was identified as a priority area because it, we were told, holds great significance to the community, in the sense that the history of this river was that it was originally a trading route. It was also called salmon container because coho, chum, and pink populations once thrived here. There are also a lot of other at-risk species in the river, like sailor sucker and sac dace. Because much of the lands are adjacent or in the ALR or private property, this creates issues of access for local nations. Along with some of the cultural history and current significance of this Stashwayam. Obviously, the threats to this river are a lot of the things that we've been hearing about today, which is around habitat fragmentation, lack of diverse riparian vegetation, if no riparian buffer at all. Reed canary grass is predominantly the invasive species that's running along the banks here. Lack of riparian, higher water temperatures, we get more rapid bank erosion, increased turbidity in the water, of course, and the flood frequency and the damage that's being done is well beyond what natural processes would normally occur. Anything to add there, Kelly? Just jump in, okay? This is a map. So I've talked a bit about what Foodlands means. The corridor component of the name of the program is about linking small parcels of privately held land together to create a continuous corridor of restored natural area. And our Stashwayam corridor is currently the reach of the river between Highway 1 and Rollison Crescent. And this is a map showing that we are, the blue dots representing some potential sites that we're currently looking to do some restoration work on. And this is a little bit, we've just completed 2 other projects. So I'd say we've completed half of the anticipated sites to create this restored corridor. The Foodlands, so the Foodlands program is focused on convening a project team to collectively design and implement and steward the restoration work. We work very closely with Kerwood Ladle, Langley Environmental Partner Society, the Kwantlen Land Guardians, CM Kwantlen, who's the business subsidiary of Kwantlen First Nation, Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, local contractors, other stewardship groups, and of course, landholders themselves. Everybody brings a diversity of skills and knowledge and expertise and varying relationships to place. So this makes our work extremely rich and our team extremely rich as well. There has been so much outside interest kind of stemming from this collaborative approach that we've developed community engagement events and land-based learning tours, which bring youth and academic researchers and funders and government officials all onto the land to learn about it, the program, as well to see all these different solutions for restoration. As I mentioned before, we weave traditional and Western knowledges together. One of the most important components for us, and as the name says, the Foodlands program, is to incorporate, work with local nations to understand some of the plants that used to thrive there, some of the cultural uses, you know, food and medicinal and ceremony uses for those plants, and work with knowledge keepers and language speakers and learners to do the species translations for us. I think one of the most important things that this program tries to do is to amplify the cultural visibility of these local nations whose territories these are and whose lands and waters reside within it. And we tend to incorporate all of the traditional dialects into our regulatory documents and reports and species at risk surveys, and our funders' reports, so that we focus and center the traditional dialects first, English or common names second, and the scientific names kind of, you know, show up from time to time. But anyway, it's very important for us to acknowledge that we're doing work on privately held agricultural lands, but that there is a history of whose lands and whose territories we're doing the work in. And so incredibly important and meaningful for us to be able to use the traditional language in all the work that we do. And we're trying to learn how to pronounce these words better. So I'll talk a little bit quickly. I don't know how much time I have, Lena. Please jump in and tell me.
You've got 4 minutes and 55 seconds.
4 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. I can best around that up. So a quick before and after photos. This is a project on Glover Road. I think it speaks for itself, but this was a bank stabilization project, which looks very different to the one we just completed here. Different design prescriptions. The other one was a 3-to-1 slope back, and various interventions to stop the massive erosion that was happening and loss of land that this farmer was experiencing year to year. This one was primarily caused by a beaver dam, an old beaver dam. But again, these are some kind of green solutions, bioengineering techniques that we're able to also trial on some of these projects. I think this was, from what I understood from Mel Johnson at KWL, was a fairly large scale installation of an innovative and new solution that we're piloting here. This was back in 2021. This was our pilot site. The before photo there shows that the frequency of flooding that happened across this pasture made it unusable for the landholder. And so we did that first project where we did the 3-to-1 slope for the bank stabilization. He was so excited about the opportunities that Foodlands could bring and Rivershed could bring to this property to make it functional and usable for him, that he donated this huge section of pasture for us to create some off-channel wetted habitat for overwintering coho and other aquatic species. So this is a recent photo, literally like 2 weeks ago that I took, and the plants are thriving. I would say we've got trees that are 15. Those willows are 15 feet tall, and that's probably three seasons of planting. So these landscapes that we did, except for this one, those two projects we completed at the end of 2021, and then we're hit with the atmospheric river events, followed by that summer with the heat dome. And all of these projects have not only survived those situations, but are thriving as well. Anything you want to add to that, Kelly? Your story about the big, massive
No.
coho?
Yeah, no. I'll save it for one-to-one conversations.
Okay.
Just so you know what we're talking about, it has to do with 6 inches.
Yeah.
The length of the fish that was spotted in the new habitat we put in. So you had to be there a moment.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, it was very exciting in our first year of winter effectiveness monitoring. We were trapping coho salmon in both a restored marsh two doors down from the fish channels, as well as seeing coho utilizing this habitat that wasn't there before. So it's quite exciting. I'd like to talk a little bit about continued stewardship. As Dave had talked about, there's an importance for ongoing maintenance and monitoring and stewardship of the lands. You can't just come in and do this work and then walk away from it. It takes nurturing, and we have Rivershed Society applies for various grants from government, from foundations, from various sources, and to the landholder does a mutual consent agreement to allow for access to these lands for ongoing stewardship and maintenance beyond the completion of a project. And so it's important to note that there isn't a cost, quote unquote, to the landholders to do any of the installation work or the long-term maintenance and management of the property. In fact, a large part of the Foodlands program is to bring the nations back onto these lands in order to do continued stewardship. And so we've hired the Kwantlen Land Guardians along with Langley Environmental Partner Society and Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance alongside KWL to come in and do effectiveness monitoring for us over a 5-year time span. We've also received funding to do species at risk surveying. That's Kelly Yates there in the middle. He and I installed maternity bat boxes for little brown myotis. We've just completed 4 marsh restoration projects and connectivity projects that are going to support Pacific water shrew habitat. And yeah, here's a photo of LEPS and Guardian team. So it's wonderful to be able to hear that from the maintenance teams that maintenance is the maintenance requirements are declining considerably year after year. Some of these sites that were completed at the end of November 2021 the plants are so large and tall that they're shading out the reed canary grass, and so the maintenance is becoming very minimal. And lastly, there's been a lot of interest in this approach, the weaving of traditional and Western knowledges in order to co-design and inform the design prescriptions and the plant species, that as well as just the approach of bringing a whole diversity of groups together to engage in meaningful conversations and to kind of find these innovative solutions to ecological ecosystem issues. And so we have been developing land-based learning programs where we're able to bring youth and academic researchers and various people onto the land. And yeah, and I think I should probably wrap up. Kelly, do you want to talk about anything on this one? You've participated in a lot of these.
No, I think the pictures tell the story. You
All
know,
right.
the work that we've done from putting fences in to
Okay.
digging fish channels. So it's good. All the work is good. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you, everybody, for listening to that. And sorry if I had some glitchy techie issues. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lara and Kelly, as well, for being here and sharing all the good work being done through the Foodlands project. I think your screen is still being shared, though, Lara. All right, let's hop into it. We have some questions coming in from our audience here. So it'd be really wonderful if all the panelists could turn on their videos again and be available to take questions. I'm going to get into it. So Uzair asks, he says, they say, I completely agree with the point on gray versus green infrastructure for flood mitigation, especially regarding their value over time. However, in my understanding, which may be incorrect, when conducting economic analyses, the greatest advantage of gray infrastructure is its ability to be implemented in a short time frame compared to green. What are your thoughts on this? And I know there's already been some conversation about that in the comments section. So maybe from a Foodlands and an agricultural perspective, gray versus green, what are your thoughts on implementation? Yeah, any one of you is free to answer. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. And first of all, we don't necessarily say we don't need gray infrastructure. That's not what we're saying. We're saying there's an optimal mix somewhere along that spectrum. I think we're overrepresented on the gray side of things. There's a riparian expert a professor that I learned from years ago, and he talked about gray infrastructure, and he said he's talking about riprap and his study of riprap over time. And I know Tom said his is held for a long time, but this professor said a quote that stuck with me. He said, "There's only two kinds of riprap. There's riprap that's failed, and there's riprap that's gonna fail." And so what happens often with gray infrastructure is it doesn't anticipate some of the variations that can happen. And if you don't have roots, deep binding roots behind that riprap, it's very vulnerable to be washed away. So I think you need to have a mixture of both. And yeah, it does take time to get the green infrastructure in place. It can also take a long time to get gray infrastructure in place too. So it's not an instant fix, but
the funny thing is, Dave, like
it's
if you can give me as one successful example of green infrastructure on the Fraser River itself, I'm not talking about the subsidiaries or the sloughs, but where has green infrastructure been successful on the Fraser River? It's a fast-moving, violent river, and it's hard to manage it that way.
Yeah, and again, Tom, I wasn't saying it's a one versus the other. I was just saying that
I mean,
in general, and in general, I mean the whole floodplain was forested at one point, or largely forested in many parts of it. And the other thing is the other part of this, and that was part of Give the River Room, is these are dynamic systems. They weren't held in place. If you look at the old channels and the old way that it was, and you know that, Tom, you can see it in your fields. You know that field was once a part of the river. And so what we're asking this river to do is not behave like a natural system. And what we've learned over time is that ultimately fails. So that's some of these things that we're talking about implementing are systems that would anticipate that and trying to find a way to accommodate that in a way that's logical. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Lena, can I just pipe in here for a second? I think, Tom, you brought up a very good point. When you're trying to get, all different parts of these groups together, the visible, tangible examples that you can give that people can look at, people can talk about, I think will go a long way in getting people more on side, more on board, because they actually see what's going on.
Thank you. Perhaps not so much on the main stem, but I'm sure you're familiar with some of the work on the Vetter. And also further downstream, there's a Living Dikes program, which is quite successful in bringing people together and doing some work on sea level rise as well as flood mitigation. So that's the Boundary Bay area. But definitely we need more projects, and that's what we're trying to achieve. Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering that. We'll move on to another, perhaps it's a comment from Roxanne. She says, I can't express how much I support your goal of advocating for changing policy regarding riparian areas along ALR. The ministries, province, and local governments do not have tools like policy or regulations or acts that make riparian areas along streams enforceable. While everyone can agree riparian areas are critical for improving water quality and mitigating floods, etc., we need policy change to require sufficient riparian setback exists and are protected in perpetuity. Education is so important, but it would be great to have riparian areas legally protected and not protected voluntarily. I'd love to hear some comment on that if anyone cares to share. Legally protecting riparian areas in the ALR.
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain level of protection that exists there already, but I guess just if you talk about wider and bigger buffers and you think about this landscape, you have to give up large, huge riparian buffers against your field, and you're paying $100,000 an acre, and you're dependent on every inch of that to make your living. What the trade-off that you're going to have to do is to on the one hand, if you don't use some of the mechanisms that we've developed, you're asking the farmer to quit and get out of business, essentially, in some of these farms. And so what we're trying to say is rather than superimpose these areas, you could actually work with the farmer and make an financial arrangement where they're contracted to keep those in place in a way that strengthens their farm and makes their farm more financially viable at the same time as solving this problem. So that would be my response, is that we do need the stick, but in our experience, the combination of carrot and stick is the most effective way to go about this. And the stick can be done in a way of an agreement or a contract that can be very long term, as long as it works for the farmer, and we've proven that we can make that work, and that's some of our approach.
And I will
making it a good business decision.
I will say, as a farmer, and I've been farming all my life, I've done a lot of things for the environment here that has made me money, right? Less commercial fertilizers, less herbicides, better management of grasslands. We have done a myriad of things that have made my farm more profitable. And so if we can somehow make all this to make us more sustainable, more profitable, it's a win-win for everybody. And that's why we have to work together, right? Because farmers have shown we're willing to change our practices and stuff if at the end of the day everybody's satisfied with the results. And I think the stick approach it's not that good. We need more of a cooperative, what's in it for everybody approach.
Yes, excellent. Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. And the next one's from Murray Ned, Executive Director of the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. Murray, recognizing you have put in 3 questions, I will try to get to at least 2 of them, considering our time. The first one is, it sounds like through Dave's presentation and model that there would be resourcing available to the farming community to transition to new and innovative practices. But what about resourcing for First Nations who will require capacity to consider opportunities and challenges for these concepts? It would seem logical that capacity is provided to both farmers and First Nations to work through the various options that will be considered. Excuse me. Does anyone? Dave, do you have it? Yeah, Lara, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid question, and I think what we're trying to do, and of course we're just building the program at Rivershed, is to find ways to support support Kwantlen we're supporting the Kwantlen Land Guardians, but supporting guardian programs to come and do that stewardship. I think there's lots of opportunity to look at a more collaborative and shared model for financing these projects and financing the stewardship and long-term maintenance and management of them. I completely agree that farmers are busy people, and even though there's a lot of wonderful farmers out there that are invested in this and understand it and get it, there's also opportunities for people to say, I just don't have the time. It doesn't matter what you're going to pay me in order to maintain it, which is fair too, right? And so how do we find ways to understand the complexities of everybody's daily lives, their kind of family obligations and those kinds of things, and to look at seeking funding, whether that's through government or other avenues, to support longer term programs, to support guardian programs, to get back onto these lands and work together with the landholders and with stewardship groups and various folks, so that we can continue to look at nature-based solutions and flood mitigation and everything else that goes along with climate change issues. So I think there are a lot of opportunities out there. I think we just need to get some momentum and start getting some funding backing on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lara. And just as a bit of a plug on our work through the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, we have our farmer and First Nation gatherings. We're trying to support where we can through there and really understand what it is the communities need. So we will obviously be continuing that work into the future based on what guidance we receive from the communities. Thank you, Murray. All right, next question also from Murray. I think this is a great opportunity to hear from the farming experts and all of the experience they have from the multi-generational perspective. In all of our constituencies, including First Nations, we will have those that are ready for change and those that will not consider any change. Are there any strategies from this group to seek some level of consensus from the farming community for flood mitigation and innovative farming practices to address the 2021 atmospheric river event?
Yeah, well, I would thanks for that question. That is specifically, as you were saying, Lena, the type of thing that we're working on within our farmer First Nations gatherings, which are throughout the Lower Mainland. And so what we're doing is bringing farmers of the Lower Mainland together along the lines of what Laura's talked about, but at the scale of the whole Lower Mainland. And we feel that if those two communities, if they do come together and in a common voice around certain priorities, whether it be flood response or flood mitigation or whatever it is, when we've already actually started the strategy with some of the meeting. Early on, it was identified that we want a collaborative strategy, which is put together with farmers and First Nations, and we've now started that strategy and have started to pull those pieces together. So when farmers and First Nations go to funding sources to offer these solutions, it's a very compelling voice when the two communities come together, which historically we have not done and we need to do more of. And I think that government will have a very hard time ignoring a united voice on this topic. So, and the money will be less of a problem. I mean, and ultimately, people talk about the expense of this. I just look at what's happening in Florida over the last week and probably going to happen today. The cost of responding to this is so incredibly high. The prevention pales in comparison, and the benefits that flow from that approach are so massive that there just doesn't seem like there's any other logical approach. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I feel like that's an amazing place to leave it. So sorry if I've cut anyone off, but just looking at the time, we do need to move on. Thank you so much, Dave. I think that really wrapped things up very well for us today.
Lena, I just want to
Yes.
say one thing. I just
Yes.
want to thank Tom for your comments. You're open-minded. Your blinders are off. I've run into a few farmers that it's all about them and nobody else. But you being up in Agassiz, 50 kilometers or so upriver from where I am, what you do has a big effect on what happens in my area. So I know your blinders are off and you're open to it. And if it doesn't make good business sense, what people want to do to your farmland, but I understand. I get it. So just thank you for what you've done so far. Thank you very much. Don't pack up your tools and head to a different area. Be strong. It's got to make sense for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Kelly.
love that.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks so much, Kelly. That's really amazing. So what we typically do at the end of these webinars, Dan is awesome and has a closing out poll for us, for those of us who are left still. And he is looking for your answers to these questions. What was a good thing that you are leaving this webinar with? A sentiment. And what's a challenge or a problem that you have identified for yourself in your community? And finally, what's an emerging idea that's come out of these conversations today? So if you could take about 15 seconds to fill this out, that'd be wonderful. I feel like we need music. Thinking music. Dan, will this stay up for a little longer, or can I move into the next slide?
Yeah, I can just leave it up and you can share the next slide.
Wonderful. So yeah, it's nothing more to say that we thank you so much to everyone for participating, for attending and being so thoughtful with your questions, to our presenters for being so amazing in sharing their life's work and their experiences. And all of this has of course been recorded and will be shared out to you shortly with any of the links that we discussed during the webinar. And please keep an eye open in your emails, because our next webinar will be all about nature-based solutions for flood resilience, like obviously keeping on theme. We don't have a date yet for that one, so it might be in a couple of months, it might be in early new year, but we will be emailing everyone who attended today and those who didn't as well. And you will be seeing that shortly. And finally, again, a big thank you to our funders, BC Swift through the federal provincial program, and of course, Real Estate Foundation of BC for supporting our work and allowing us to think big and think about what needs to be done for our region. And I'd like to say on behalf of Dan at Resilient Waters and myself and all of our Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, we appreciate everyone being here today, and we hope to see you soon. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Cool, and we can stop recording, I guess.